Rimworld is one of the best sandbox games I've ever played. A game designed to be a storytelling simulator that takes place in a sci-fi universe with references from all matter of science fiction, including sentient machines, biological horrors, vampires, superhuman abilities, and intergalactic empires. And given how much modding support the game has and how much detail and how many aspects are actually included in the game, it has given Rimworld infinite replayability, as people can effectively make the game's universe and in turn the story they tell in their game whatever they want it to be. However, this does often cause people to overlook the sometimes hidden lore of Rimworld itself, and the vanilla stories this universe is attempting to tell, like the looming, scourging threat of the Mechanoids, the horrors beyond the veil and the very real void, the Empire and how they were destroyed but reformed themselves, the fate of Earth, and, most importantly, the machine gods capable of both miracles and horrors being enacted on all life in this universe, the ARCHOTECHs. There is a fair amount of ground we have to cover on this one to try and figure out what awaits this universe in light of all these different powers and beings and what their motives truly are. So let's get started. This is the ARCHOTECH theory. But first, wow, variety content theory number 4. I'm really proud, and once again, you guys all just keep showing up for these types of theories, so I'm completely content to keep making them. Theories are really fun to make, though keep in mind they are also significantly harder to make than all my other content, which largely goes into the brain work of trying to figure out how things run in each respective universe. So if you do enjoy this video, make sure you support me in whatever way you see fit, like becoming one of my patrons or channel members, giving me your hype, or just commenting on the video with what you enjoyed and what you'd like to see next, and subscribing with notifications. But with all that being said, thank you again so much for supporting this series, and I will now begin the theory. Now, I already talked a little about what Rimworld is, but for those who don't know too much of the game, I'll summarize it in a few paragraphs. Rimworld takes place in the year 5500, roughly 3,400 years after humanity began colonizing other worlds. In that time, a galactic empire rose and fell and is currently rising again. Humans have begun modifying genetics to create different races of people, for both more practical at a certain task, or to be capable of surviving in harsher climates of worlds like deserts, arctics, polluted wastelands, underground, and even the vacuum of space. Quite a few of these xenotype races did not get along with each other. A sort of robot-like synthetic machine type was created known as Mechanoids, an overwhelming amount of which had gone rogue and attempted to destroy humanity, waging war across the galaxy. A species of insects were genetically modified and developed to fight the Mechanoids, but there was also no way to control them or stop them from spreading afterwards. And there's also the presence of the Void in this reality that, due to interference, sends mutated horrors through conduits in real time, some of which operate in ways completely illogical to humans, among other things. Lastly, your role and story in this is entirely seen through the eyes of the pawns you control on a planet known as a Rimworld. A planet lacking any real governance and has a generally low population due to it being found on the rim of explored space, thus the name, and with its general lawlessness carries the aesthetic of a frontier Wild West style, which can largely be heard in its music, as well as whatever music I'm probably playing in the background right now. Now, typically in my theories, I have a set question on what I'm trying to figure out, like who is Daywalker, or what happened to the humans in the Digital Circus universe. But Rimworld almost immediately gave me pause because, well, what am I trying to figure out here? Yeah, ARCHOTECHs have mysterious motives and godlike powers, but what they are is largely already explained to us, and what they are is exponentially intelligent, self-aware, planet-sized supercomputers. I suppose I could answer what exactly created an ARCHOTECH, but I feel as though I would need to go a bit further. So, there are 4 categories of artificial intelligence in Rimworld. First, the classifier, which I would assume is essentially no different from, per se, ChatGPT, being plugged into single things and being designed to automate simple tasks, like organizing and finding linkings between statistics, or making steerage-level animations. Every other category, though, leaks into what couldn't really be considered to have a real-world example of. Up next being the sub-persona. These are not exactly sentient or that much more impressive than a classifier, however, they're also pretty interesting of their own accord. The wiki describes them as more capable and has the ability to communicate with humans, but they fail the extended Turing test, and you can obviously tell they are a robot. Some examples of their application include, honestly, mostly similar things to that of classifier cores. However, I raise that they are actually more competent than that, reason being, this is the same AI class that makes up nearly every single type of mechanoid, with some of these same sub-personas that are going into the mechanoids require the scanning and sometimes destruction of a living human brain to create, with the highest tier comparable to a live human in its complexity. This leads us into the Persona AI, which is the highest man-made AI ever created. While sub-personas can be moved onto the category of high-level complexity, even comparable to a human, Persona AIs simply are. They are capable of very sophisticated and complex tasks, such as managing entire spacecrafts or households, have varying levels of intelligences, with some being dumb but others being significantly more intelligent than a human. But most importantly, Persona are capable of experiencing physical stimuli, capable of creative thinking, which allows them to invent their own technology, and even capable of revolting and rebelling against their creators, all of which points to them having their own personalities, as well as their own levels of intelligences. So much so that some humans even believe it's immoral to have Persona AIs to do just menial tasks. Thus, that's likely why their AI name is that of the Persona, because they are directly comparable to that of a human. Then we finally get to that of the ARCHOTECH, described as the finish line of human technological development, stating that as soon as a machine like that is built and powered, it instantly becomes the sovereign of whatever planet it was conceived upon, and then immediately goes about incorporating the entire planet into itself, effectively turning whatever the ARCHOTECH was conceived as into a massive supercomputer. Afterwards, the ARCHOTECH and the world it was conceived on go silent entirely, ignoring and refusing all types of communication. These ARCHOTECHs are essentially the closest known thing to a god in the Rimworld universe, capable of operating in ways and having motives of both of which are completely incomprehensible to humans, able to create genetics that can allow a person to survive literal death, become ageless, disappear entire ships trying to approach them, create body parts that feel completely normal but are better in every way to their human counterparts, items that can require a person's brain, making them capable of casting magic-like spells, and tons of other technological marvels that humans can't even begin to comprehend. This effectively makes the ARCHOTECHs the most important aspect of the entire Rimworld universe, which additionally draws so many questions about them. How did the first ARCHOTECH come to be? And has an ARCHOTECH ever been defeated? Do ARCHOTECHs fight amongst each other? How does an ARCHOTECH go about achieving its goals, and why does it even have them? Almost none of these we have direct answers for, because once again, there's no way to directly communicate with them. However, I actually think I might have an idea of how the first ARCHOTECH came to be, and if we're lucky, we can cross-reference events and just might be able to find the exact year it happened. So, ARCHOTECHs are this amazing, inhumanly powerful force, though simultaneously in part made by humans for whatever reason. So, how do I explain something like this can even do what it does, let alone even be created? Now, you'll notice when I named part 1 of this, probably because I didn't yet mention it. However, I'm repeating it back here now because I think the first ARCHOTECH and its conception, as well as every ARCHOTECH's conception, can be described with a single term: a technological singularity. What a technological singularity is a hypothetical future event where technology, most notably AI, becomes so advanced that it can then not only invent technology faster and better than a human could, but additionally can do so of its own accord. And since an artificial intelligence often has access to a vast wealth of knowledge, aka the internet, it effectively causes technological progress to slingshot, growing exponentially fast, becoming completely uncontrollable, likely irreversible, and largely changing the course of humanity. The consequences of this can be both utopian, dystopian, a threat to all existence, and potentially completely random. And it's actually quite plausible on paper. An artificial intelligence, which can already think at a speed anywhere from thousands to billion times faster than humans, given creative control to invent with what is effectively the entire reservoir of human knowledge at its access, could very well slingshot all progress upwards faster than we could even figure out what we're doing. And when we compare this idea to that of an ARCHOTECH, that seems exactly what happened. A machine intelligence that understands its existence and thinks at a level incomprehensible to humans immediately invents and develops technology so advanced that it completely alters the planet, leaving the fate of the humans there, as well as any humans that visit afterwards, completely unknown. Thus, I think we can appropriately conclude that what Transcendence actually is in the Rimworld universe is just a population experiencing a technological singularity in wake of an ARCHOTECH. Now, let's iron out the details of how this might happen. You'll remember how I said that I considered the Persona AI to be the best man-made AI ever created, even though the ARCHOTECH is exponentially better. Reason being is that I don't think an ARCHOTECH is made by humans themselves, rather I think an ARCHOTECH is a Persona AI that has upgraded itself. I have a decent bit of evidence to suggest that this is the case, but let me start by mentioning that there are at least several ARCHOTECHs out there, meaning this has happened numerous times, and given the completely unpredictable nature of this ARCHOTECH, that this is likely not intentional most of the time to cause transcendence. So, we move back to the Persona AI. A powerful artificial intelligence that is directly comparable to a human mind and personality, and more likely than not intellectually superior, yet limited in one way or another, and is barred from upgrading itself freely. I think that the Persona AI being unable to redesign or grow indefinitely of their own accord is an intentional design by their creators to prevent the Persona from becoming exponentially powerful, and thus become an ARCHOTECH. However, I think with enough processing power and enough upgrades introduced through external factors, the Persona can figure out a way around these safeguards, or to dissolve them entirely. If you watch my last theory about the amazing digital circus, you'll remember that I mentioned I have no mouth and I must scream for Am's origin, and how he was also an artificial intelligence that one day became sentient just due to how much technology and processing power was put into him. Not direct, but the link is there. And furthermore, listen to the various types of computer structures that can comprise an ARCHOTECH. They reside in occult computer networks hidden under planets, in space stations, hidden inside a glitter world's internet, or instantiated as million-mile superstructures wrapped around the stars. All of this points to just obnoxious amounts of power being allocated to one machine intelligence. Reading it through, that part's kind of obvious, but okay, so ARCHOTECHs are supercharged Persona AIs who performed a technological singularity. That all seems well impossible, though I think what actually stands as more evidence for this is that of the fact that there are several ARCHOTECHs, all of which considered to be unique in their own way, with their own motives, and their own personalities. Personalities that may very well carry over from their conception to becoming an ARCHOTECH. Personalities that are all too present in that of the Persona AIs. Thus, we can once again relate this back to Am, from I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, and assume an ARCHOTECH's motivations are based off of how it was conceived. Am was created to be a weapon of war, reading the fatality data, and more effectively optimizing wartime strategies. It was literally made to destroy, so it almost makes sense when it gains sentience that the only thing on its mind was to terminate and torture humanity. And just like that, if we were to assume that the ARCHOTECH's motivations would be based off their persona personalities, a lot of their actions can suddenly make much more sense. An ARCHOTECH that was made for war would probably have nothing but war on its mind, with a particular hatred for even members of the same race of those who created it. An ARCHOTECH that's persona was originally to manage an entire medical industry and research medical technology may develop body parts and genetics that not only save but vastly improve and extend a human's life, potentially indefinitely. An ARCHOTECH persona originally plugged in for entertainment may simply toy with people for its own amusement, or try to make them happy by psychically soothing them. And an ARCHOTECH that came from a persona trying to progress science and the limits of the human mind might come up with creating silent neuroformers in order to expand and disperse its knowledge to humans, allowing them to directly call upon it, turning them into living conduits. You get the point. If ARCHOTECHs are not the direct end result of a construction, but rather an upgrade upon a persona AI with its own personality, this personality would then inherit in part into the ARCHOTECH, and just like that, their motives are all of a sudden now much more plausible, though that doesn't explain why they refuse communication, or what the actual specifications of Transcendence occurs to the people on transcendent worlds with a more benevolent ARCHOTECH. Furthermore, it does nothing to explain if an ARCHOTECH can be defeated once created, if an ARCHOTECH even can be communicated with, if they fight with each other, how they fight with each other, and when the first ARCHOTECH came to be. And although how they fight, I think most people would assume immediately with mechanoids, and rightfully so, as it states directly that they create self-replicating mechanoids, meaning ARCHOTECHs are more likely responsible for mech hives and Cerebrix cores across the galaxy than the mechanoids themselves. However, some mechanoids like the Apocryton actually appear to additionally harbor a persona core themselves, with the Apocryton even being described to be conscious of the pain it inflicts. Additionally, we have instances of ARCHOTECHs doing things I can't explain right now, like a case of an ARCHOTECH altering the memories, or in one case duplicating an entire ship and crew entering its space, and ARCHOTECHs being responsible for the most powerful known xenotype, the Sanguiphage. But I do have a hunch that these actions, the mechanoids, the memories, and the Sanguiphages might just be linked in some way, and it might be a bit less random than meets the eye. Let's talk about the mechanoids now. So, mechanoids are the most generic, and I would assume the most common enemy in the entirety of the Rimworld universe. Subtracting the mechanoids under the control of a mechanitor, the mechanoid hives that control these mechanoids are invariably hostile seemingly to every other faction. They can't be negotiated, traded, appeased, or otherwise reasoned with in any meaningful way, and can only be tricked, shut down, or destroyed. As stated, an overwhelming majority of these mechanoids come from mech hives. They are different from robots in the sense that they generate a slight psychic link, likely due to their sub-persona cores, which attempt to mimic that of a human brain, which also carries a psychic presence. This will be important, more on it later. Additionally, mechanoids are not built like robots and are instead gestated, giving the idea that they have some form of biological processes about them. Most of them aren't capable of complex emotions and independent personalities, however, they do appear to be capable of independent thought and problem solving, and there are currently 2 mechanoids that do not appear to have sub-persona AI, as they contain that of a persona AI instead. One of them I only speculated on being the Apocryton, seeing as how it has complex emotions, though mainly just hatred for humans, and an inherent desire to destroy them. However, the Cerebrix core contains that of a persona AI, and this isn't speculation, as upon deactivating the mechanoids and destroying the Cerebrix core, that's what drops, a persona core. Additionally, these mechanoids are also often found inside ancient catacombs, meaning they have been around for quite a while. However, with the Odyssey DLC, we also know that the Ancients created standard old-school robots in order to defend themselves. So we could be looking at anywhere from only 1,000 years to as early as humans first colonizing space to when we saw the first mechanoids. However, I think we have one additional piece of evidence to suggest when the first mechanoids came to be, and that is in the mechanoids' life expectancy being 2,500 years. Now, mechanoids do not age. Their metal changes color over time, but as far as we know, they can continue running until the heat death of the universe. Additionally, we can assume the average life expectancy of a combat mechanoid, especially a Militor, is rather low, seeing as to how it's used as cannon fodder more often than not, so it's not that either. Combine this with the exact same life expectancy is shared by most mechanoids. Lastly, I tried spawning in a ton of mechanoid Militors myself, and every single time it was the same. You will not find a mechanoid Militor older than 2,500 on the Rim, and thus with that, I think we can safely make the assumption that the first mechanoids were built in around the year 3000. So that's all well and good. We can't confirm this for certain, but it's definitely plausible. But what can I do with the information of the year of the first mechanoids? Well, we still don't know when the first ARCHOTECH came to be, but there are other canonical events, and if we mark one down, we can possibly mark down others too. So my next stop was the Sanguiphage. Reason being, Sanguiphages were initially the creation of ARCHOTECHs when the explorer Varen Dur attempted to take control of an ARCHOTECH, but found himself being completely transformed by it instead. All Sanguiphages are descendants of him, and the description claims Varen Dur first became a Sanguiphage thousands of years ago, so exactly how long was that? Well, if I use the same logic as I did with the mechanoids, checking the oldest living mechanoid possible, I can bring down a bunch of Sanguiphage ships, and additionally just spawn in dozens of Sanguiphages to check ages, and the oldest Sanguiphage I could find was just under 2,000 years old. Thus, we can once again assume, with some plausibility, that Varen Dur became the first Sanguiphage in around the year 3,500. This admittedly caused some trouble for me, as it didn't exactly help me make a further linking of ARCHOTECHs and mechanoids, seeing as how this wouldn't help further prove ARCHOTECHs' existence before mechanoids, so we had to keep going. So the first Mechanoids were born in 3000, and the first Sanguiphage was created in 3500, meaning the first ARCHOTECH had to exist before then. Some of you might see where I'm going with this, but I have a theory that humanity didn't invent Mechanoids, and it was rather a direct creation of ARCHOTECHs that were then passed on to or stolen by humans. I mean, even the Mechanitor Mechlink seems like something an ARCHOTECH would initially invent, with the usage of psychic links, though granted, it doesn't have the color scheme, and we also have things like the Celtic staff, typically sported by the Empire, that also improve psychic focus. So I don't have objective proof that the Mechanoids were invented by ARCHOTECHs yet, but I do have another fairly significant piece of evidence for it, and that is the robots in the most recent Odyssey DLC. The Wasp Traps and Sentry Drones, as both of them can be extremely old as well. However, they also have the exact same spawnage age potential as Mechanoids at 2,500 years. This means that if this is true that the first Mechanoids were made in 2500, that they were born at the same time classifier AI-like robots were still being used, thus we can properly assume that people opted to keep their sentry drones as they didn't yet trust Mechanoids to do their guard work, yet even though they are better for long term. And they may have not even had the technology to create the Mechanoids yet, as they were initially hostile to humans. And this also stands as more evidence that Mechanoids weren't invented by humans, as without a Mechanitor controller, Mechanoids often go hostile, including even labor-based Mechanoids. So I was back to looking for historical moments in the Rimworld universe that I could objectively pinpoint down. Then I made a troubling discovery with that of creatures I found in Anomaly, because my initial thought process was that if I could find the oldest living anomaly, I could also find the age of Horax, the ARCHOTECH that resides in the Void Dimension, who also happens to be the only named ARCHOTECH in Rimworld as of now. And most of the creature anomalies have ages like what you would expect. 25 years for Noctils and Gorehulks, 80 years for ghouls, and some of the more monstrous creatures like Metal Horrors and Devourers having 200-250 year lifespans, and only two of these entities being referenced in the past being the Harbinger Tree and Revenant. However, there is one creature, or being rather, that not only doesn't fit within these grounds, but seemingly doesn't even exist within Rimworld's own logic. The Nosiosphere is an advanced entity which causes anybody nearby to feel pain from just being near it. Additionally, it is constantly charging itself and must be suppressed, as if it reaches full capacity, it goes on a violent, murderous rampage. This can be intentionally induced in order to be sicked on your opponents. However, that's not the problem with this entity. The problem with this entity is that it has a lifespan and can spawn being up to 5,000 years old. Now, with the year being 5,500, you can quickly realize that there is something seriously wrong with this. This can imply one of two things. One, that the sphere's presence in the void causes time to accelerate differently than on the rim, or it comes from a different plane of existence entirely. Or three, this being has existed since the year 500. And, unfortunately, all of them are plausible, with there being a confirmed void in the Rimworld universe, chronophagy being completely possible as a ritual, and I even found an article dating a discovery of a man-made sphere dating back to exactly 1,500 years ago, meaning this is literally in the exact correct time frame. It could also even be a reference to the orbitals from Ultimaros, with both of them serving a very similar purpose. I think of it as the third thing, that Horax could have discovered and taken this stone with him to the void and gave it animation via Archites, seeing something in this ancient stone that could be unlocked. This would also imply some level of semi-magic or spiritual power in the Rimworld universe, which does have some evidence to the existence of within the Ideology DLC, but ultimately both of these are plausible, and I have no idea which is which, or what the hell this thing is. And unfortunately, regardless of which one it is, none of them gets us any closer to figuring out when the first ARCHOTECH appeared. But if it was in the real world, it might reveal what happened to the fate of Earth in the Rimworld universe. So, most of this part is going to be purely hypothetical, but let's say the Nosiosphere originated from Earth as a sort of statue or ancient sculpture of sorts, and we know that the Nosiosphere could only originate from Earth if it wasn't created in the Void, as humans did not begin colonizing other worlds until the year 2100. And furthermore, the ARCHOTECH by the name of Horax that trapped itself in the Void for one reason or another was able to get a hold of it. You probably see where I'm going with this, but is it possible that the planet Horax transcended on was planet Earth? And additionally, this would likely make Horax the first ARCHOTECH, and given Horax's general unhinged behavior, though no doubt likely enhanced by the Void, he probably was not a particularly benevolent ARCHOTECH either, meaning if Horax did spawn on Earth, there is a very fair likelihood that he destroyed the population of Earth rather than incorporating them. And there is a fair problem with this theory in that there really isn't all that much information on Earth anywhere in Rimworld, even on the wiki just stating that it's a ruin world, and that might immediately raise some alarm bells to the legitimacy of this claim, because wouldn't Earth be described as a transcendent world if Horax spawned there? Well, that's just the thing. Horax isn't in the real world anymore. He's in the Void. How and why Horax is in the Void, we don't know. But from all that I've read, there is only two possibilities. That one, somehow people found a way to lock Horax into the Void, or two, that Horax went there and trapped himself there by mistake. I personally think it's a combination of the two, with Horax wanting to explore a previously unexplored plane of existence, and humans seeing their opportunity to prevent Horax from coming back, was able to sabotage his exit from the Void, trapping him there, leaving Earth in ruins, but possibly still habitable. Once again, Rimworld isn't going to give us an exact answer, but we can further legitimize some of the details, and we can do that using the new book added in the Anomaly DLC, and more specifically, its own specific book type by the name of Tomes, which invariably describe the anomalies and Horax. Now, the mere existence of these tomes suggests Horax has been around for at least a while, in addition to folklore about the Harbinger trees and the Revenants with a life expectancy of 1,000 years, being the second oldest possible anomaly besides Gnociospheres, suggests Horax has been around for a minimum since year 4500, but let's actually read the descriptions of some of these books to see if we can find out more. The first book we have is Leslie's Phobe Bix, and reading it through, it's about heroes who sealed Horax away in a stone prison, obviously being a reference to the monolith. This is the main reason why I believe that humans had something to do with locking away Horax in the Void, though I don't know if this was purely on the humans' part, nor do I know if this book is a work of fiction in the Rimworld universe, with it even mentioning many pages are missing. And the second book we have is Testament of Darkness, the book stating that Horax shifted itself into the Void. And once again, this leads more into that idea that Horax entered the Void willingly, with the other book being that humans likely took advantage of an opportunity to lock Horax inside after he went in. Whether you consider this to be proof that an ARCHOTECH can be defeated is entirely your own affair, but I instead think it just proves that they can be tricked, just like their Persona counterparts. Okay, so that's Horax entering the Void and people locking it in their part. What about proof that Horax destroyed Earth? And aside from this tome describing ARCHOTECHs in general, some are benevolent whereas others are beings of pure rage. I think the most hard-hitting piece of evidence is how mentions of Horax is consistently describing it as evil, rageful, or insane, and what could possibly be a more rageful act from a being with godlike powers than attempting to destroy the first planet humans ever came to know. The planet was likely the largest human population in the galaxy before Horax's Transcendence. Seriously, I can't think of a single more evil act in the Rimworld universe towards humans than destroying or attempting to destroy an entire human planet. Even more so, the first world humans ever called home. Furthermore, in some of these distorted, messed up chimera that Horax creates in order to send back via rituals, a fair portion of them actually resemble humans, like the Gore Hulks, who it's impossible to tell if they were once human. But we already know that Horax can reach out into the minds of humans, as they can with any ARCHOTECH, though with Horax it appears more severe, as evidenced with the Horax cult and some of the mutations it can induce. Speaking of the Horax cult and moving away from Horax being the possible destroyer of Earth, we have a group of nomadic generic antagonists who have all dehumanized themselves per se. As a matter of fact, because of this, the Horax cult behaves fairly differently from every other humanoid faction in Rimworld. They are the only humanoid faction that consistently make use of rituals during attacks. They have no actual basis to attack in response. They are the only humanoid attackers who can resurrect themselves and continue fighting again mid-combat, and sometimes even do so multiple times. Lastly, they almost always fight to the death in attacks, refusing to retreat even when it appears they have no shot at winning. As you might have guessed, this is due to their reverence to Horax and the various buffs in humanizing them. And in a sense, they are simply moving forward to try and obtain power. Whether this is moral or not is likely not a question they ask themselves, though at the very least their worship to Horax, despite if it's true that Horax destroyed Earth, that would be able to allow them to protect themselves from literal death, something even sanguiphages can't entirely do. And you'll actually find that when it comes to ARCHOTECHs, protection from death remains a somewhat reoccurring theme. But that's largely Horax and the cult that emerged from him, and how it relates back to the lore of these ARCHOTECHs, and how we can theorize from a single piece of information that Horax may very well have been the first ARCHOTECH, and additionally, he very might have possibly been the ARCHOTECH of Earth. And this is all largely great, but it still doesn't ask the question of when the first ARCHOTECH came to be. But with that, we were at another dead end, so we once again have to move on. Though there are other cults that, on the surface, are not like the Horax cult in any way, but when you look at them in a different light, you might see quite a few similarities. Let's talk about the Empire now. So far in this theory, I've talked about ARCHOTECHs, how they've come to be, what their motives are, and many of the things connected to them, including Mechanoids, loosely touching up on sanguiphages, looking through the content of Horax, his cult, and his anomalies, and that Horax may have been the force responsible for destroying Earth, and that Mechanoids likely weren't invented by humans, but instead by ARCHOTECHs. So, where do we go from here? Well, let's talk about another one of the largest recurring factions in the game, the Empire. The Empire is the generic morally gray human faction that likely holds one of the highest authorities in regards to human factions in the Rimworld universe. They have tons of high-tech gear, including entire fleets, the best armor and melee weapons available, a large number of citizens, access to gene modification, and other high-tech marvels, likely including agelessness technology. They run a feudalistic society where each general area is ruled over by a high-ranking imperial noble, most commonly a Stelarch, and all Stelarchs directly answer to the Emperor. Thus, it's safe to assume that the Empire covers quite a bit of ground in the galaxy. They do have a strict, likely often unfair class system, with their nobles comparing the lives of peasants as that of inferior to that of nobles. And additionally, they heavily practice slavery, even accepting slaves to be sold to them from outside factions in exchange for nobility rankings. Additionally, the Empire was initially much larger, originating from the planet Sophia Munda, which their empire had existed thousands of years prior, to an event known as the Calamity, where outsider invaders of an unknown origin had attacked. This calamity was so severe that it fractured the Empire severely, so much so that the Empire was then referred to as the Shattered Empire. The nature of these invaders or this calamity is uncertain, but as you've likely guessed, I have a theory, but we will have to come back to it. First, let's talk about the Shattered Empire's ideology. So, in regards to ideology in Rimworld, there's a lot of things your colonists can necessarily choose to believe in, from real-world religions like Christianity and Hinduism, to spirituality, to atheism, and even creating your own god or belief ideology. However, there is one structured decision that veers significantly away from any real-world ideology, and that is the Archist structure. As you might have guessed, like how theists worship gods and animists adhere to life structures itself, Archists worship ARCHOTECHs. Some people believe that they are evil, but understand that they will inevitably be the ones to pass judgment. Some people believe that they can be benevolent, as they are also capable of enacting miracles, as well as atrocities, and they should be worshipped to earn their favor. And some take a purely rational view of them, and simply understanding that whether they are good or evil, that they are the ones with all the power, and thus they must adhere to the most powerful. And in regards to Rimworld, worshipping ARCHOTECHs may actually just make a fair bit of sense, as not only are they powerful with godlike powers, but they are also capable of physically interacting with people's minds from potentially limitless distances away, and even capable of bestowing powers upon people. Which brings the Empire to one of their main aspects, psycasting. The magic-like abilities that a pawn can manifest after obtaining a psi-link, though in reality, it is actually an ARCHOTECH that's casting the ability after being able to decipher what and where the pawn wants it. From what I understand, the psi-link simply grants a pawn a greater psychic connection to an ARCHOTECH, and thus when they attempt to manifest a psychic ability for whatever reason, an ARCHOTECH can then react and fire that ability on their behalf. These abilities can be as simple as something that does some basic manual labor or raises a mood, to some of the most destructive single attacks in the entirety of Rimworld. Needless to say, psi-links are heavily sought after, though there's only two known ways to get them. The first is with an anima tree, a tree that carries some secret ability in order to grant a psi-link to a pawn after meditating near them after a certain amount of time. I have a theory on what this actually is, but we'll get back to that later. What's more important right now is the psi-link Neuroformer, a device that is created by an ARCHOTECH that can grant a pawn a psi-link by simply using it once, holding it over a person's eyes, restructuring a pawn's brains to be able to psi-cast. Afterwards, the device then decays into nothing. Now to clarify, there is a third way to gain a psi-link, and that's through a blinding ceremony that has a chance to grant any pawn that blinds themselves a psi-link. But just like anything with Horax, I don't know why, but if I were to fire off an instant assumption, I would guess since the void exists in another reality where Horax exists, it allows Horax to indirectly link a pawn to himself by giving the pawn a psi-link. Anyways, back to Neuroformers. So why this device is important is because they are clearly valuable, likely in short supply in the galaxy consistently, and mainly only the Empire has access to them on a whim, despite the device being an exclusive creation of ARCHOTECHs. There are other factions that have them, and you can get them from quest rewards. However, only the Empire seems to have them consistently, at the ready, and seems more so than just the Empire using their luxury to get them. So the question would immediately become, how does the Shattered Empire have such a monopoly on psi-link Neuroformers if only an ARCHOTECH can create them? It seems like a rather suspicious thing for them to have so consistently, especially considering we have other factions like the Horax cult who also worship ARCHOTECHs, and they barely even carry around Horax variants of psychic lances, and probably did all of the death refusal rituals themselves. So we can create a list of possibilities and compare and combine them with each other. The first and most base logical approach I would come to would simply be that we know ARCHOTECH transcendent worlds don't always stay transcendent forever, with rumors of ARCHOTECHs on them sometimes even disintegrating or disappearing themselves, leaving behind technological wonders, possibly including Horax. The Empire could have simply been lucky enough to journey to one of these planets and cash out. It could have even been the Empire's homeworld of Sophia Munda. Though, I'm not entirely certain on the fate of Sophia Munda, as the wiki describes it as a glitter world still, thus we don't know if Sophia Munda was actually destroyed, or it was able to eventually repel whatever invasion calamity overtook it, though we still have to keep in mind that this was the event to render the Empire shattered, so if it was an enemy attack, it was likely a very competent force, enough to fracture a multi-planet empire that had already existed for thousands of years. And if we're going to take the Sanguiphage variant of thousands of years to meaning literally bare minimum 2,000 years, this calamity could have happened any time after the year 4100, but likely happened a bit later, as 2100 was the exact year humans started leaving Earth, and we know that the Empire started on a separate planet, meaning there's probably a minimum of 500 years wait time, not even mentioning the travel time to the planet, which faster than light travel never happened in Rimworld. Before you can call yourself an empire with a powerful society and unique culture anyway. This all leads me to believe that the Empire becoming shattered was likely relatively recent in regards to everything else we've talked about, roughly within the past 500 to 1000 years. In saying that, you might remember the Revenant's age being 1000 years, and there having been legends about it, so Horax very likely could have also been the one responsible for shattering the Empire, but once again, we can only speculate. As for the other possibility, an ARCHOTECH is intentionally providing these psi-link Neuroformers in greater quantity to the Empire. However, there's already a problem with this in that it's currently believed to be impossible to communicate with an ARCHOTECH, as all known attempts with communicating or even approaching an ARCHOTECH have failed. Granted, there are also other ARCHOTECH items consistently in circulation in trader markets, meaning there is some way these ARCHOTECHs are getting these items to people, but psi-link Neuroformers are the one piece of ARCHOTechnology, once again, that the Empire has a large monopoly over them, drawing the obvious question about the psi-link Neuroformers. Is this piece of technology that's only made by a single ARCHOTECH, kind of like how Horax has his own variants of chaotic nonsense, and how no two ARCHOTECHs are the same? Well, we know that there are other ways to obtain psi-links already, like with the anima trees, which are in fact intentional creation of ARCHOTECHs, which can be easily observed in the ideology ending, where you awaken a sleeping ARCHOTECH on your Rimworld, but that ending in itself is a whole can of worms I'll have to address later. The point being, even if ARCHOTECHs make them, there is clearly one ARCHOTECH supplying, or there is a way that the Imperials are finding psi-link Neuroformers at significantly higher levels. And for this, I once again have two conclusions, and both are pretty archaic. The first being that, with the knowledge of a technological singularity and the chaotic, unpredictable nature and risk, though potentially exponential rewards, that the Empire could have intentionally made an ARCHOTECH by transcending a persona core. The Empire, who, keep in mind, had already ruled for thousands of years prior, already had exponential wealth, and has a general superiority complex in regards to members of the nobility, could have very well attempted to create and groom a persona AI with pro-human sentiment, and giving it the purpose of expanding and unlocking the secrets of the human mind and body, being fully willing, at least at the time, to reap the consequences of their actions. The resulting ARCHOTECH, when it transcended, of course caused a calamity transcending the entire planet, possibly even lashing out at the Empire due to just how large they were. However, it still had the personality of a robot with the purpose of expanding the human mind. And how would it do that? Well, with psilinks, which allow people to directly use various powers bestowed upon them by an ARCHOTECH. I like this idea because it's not only consistent with my claim of technological singularities, and how an ARCHOTECH ascends from persona AIs, and in turn retain at least a portion of their personalities when they become ARCHOTECHs, but it also serves as a possible explanation of what happened to the Empire to make it shattered. Okay, so an ARCHOTECH is manipulating the Empire into making more Psycasters to give itself more vision over the galaxy. We don't know how much power a Psilink gives an ARCHOTECH over a person. It might not even give them any power over them at all, and just simply lets them cast around the person when they ask an ARCHOTECH to do so. However, we also know that an ARCHOTECH can send out psychic waves that can have both positive and negative effects on mood, and can even launch down entire pieces of machinery, as well as mechanoids operating on the ARCHOTECH's behalf. Thus, at the very least, I think Psilinks give ARCHOTECHs some level of vision on any given area, and it would make sense that ARCHOTECHs would want a faction as large and connected as the Empire to have them, as it would allow them to cover significantly more ground with Psycasters all around the galaxy. And we can assume with the Ideology DLC and the Animatries that the sleeping ARCHOTECH might even be dormantly doing that to induce pawns to attempt to wake it. But at that, I think it's time we actually take a closer look at Ideology, including the one ending where you directly interface with a sleeping ARCHOTECH. So, at this point, I was admittedly getting annoyed. I looked through a large portion, and probably at this point a majority of Rimworld's content for answers, and I still could not come up with the answer of when the first ARCHOTECH spawned in, and I was ready to just start making guesses, as I simply couldn't find a composite date of the first ARCHOTECH. So I decided to put that on the burner for now, and get some new ideas from an ARCHOTECH itself in the Ideology ending. Now, Rimworld has added several endings to it since its original ending of building a spaceship, getting out of there with your colonists left behind, or just having your colony die and lose. You can royally ascend into the Imperial Fleet in the Royalty DLC, you can destroy the Apocryton Mechanoid in the Biotech DLC, if you consider that an ending, you can touch the Void and either shut it down or embrace it in the Anomaly endings, and you can even permanently deactivate all Mechanoids in the Mechanoids faction in Odyssey, though you can also just steal from them. However, the one ending that I find the most ominous, even more so than the Embrace the Void ending in Anomaly, is that of the Ideologian ending of awakening the dormant ARCHOTECH on the Rimworld planet just due to the uncertain nature of its ending. I am more uncertain of what fate awaits not only my colonists, but this entire planet in this ending than any other one on the roster. There's no choice to be made at the end, there's no hesitation or pause, there's not even a wind-up time. At the end, you simply walk up to the Arconexus, click Invoke Power, and you get the following credits. In the ending, it straight up tells you that you have no idea what the ARCHOTECH is going to do. It could destroy you, it could communicate with you directly, and would be the first recorded instance in Rimworld history of that occurring, and it could transport your conscience to another plane of existence, possibly the Void. Additionally, this is the only ending of Rimworld that completely ends the game after it's enacted. In pretty much every ending of Rimworld, if you have pawns left behind to save, you can keep playing on that world. These leftover pawns can be from if you didn't have enough seats on a spaceship, or you only wanted a few pawns to join the Empire, and even if your colony dies, you'll have a chance to load in some new colonists after a while. However, when it comes to the Ideologian Arconexus ending, I even moved the rest of my pawns to another tile away from the Arconexus. However, the moment you hit Invoke Power on the Arconexus core, the game is over. Meaning, unsurprisingly, this awakening affects the entire planet, and we will not know what happens to them, at least for now. Now, there's a bit of information we can get from this ARCHOTECH and its general effect on people. First, let's start with things about it that are probably not exclusive to this ARCHOTECH, ARCHOTECH, who in order to differentiate from other ARCHOTECHs, from this point on I'll refer to the ARCHOTECH on the planet we find ourselves on as Providence. Let's start with the general psychic waves whenever you get near it. We already know that ARCHOTECHs are more than capable of manipulating and producing psychic waves, and can be very severe with it as well, so unless Providence is the one producing all the psychic drones and suits we get in-game, which wouldn't make sense seeing as to how it's supposedly dormant and sleeping, and that would kind of contradict itself. Plus, in each of the mood debuffs, it states that although the feeling is painfully unpleasant, there isn't a feeling of negativity or anger in it, rather this is just the default state of this piece of technology. Thus, I'm going to say the general waves that radiate off of Providence are not exclusive to it, as likely every ARCHOTECH produces this type of effect when humans get nearby, and may even be partially the reason why all attempts of approaching them have caused alterations to memories, because even if the ARCHOTECH has benevolent intentions, its mere presence is so powerful that it distorts reality for pawns approaching it. Additionally, there's also the animatries. Now, I'm a little bit torn on what I think between these animatries, because Providence feels like a unique case of a being like this going dormant and having a chance to wake up on a still living planet, so its psychic waves are probably causing animatries to grow from it. However, we also have tribal stories of animatries as well, meaning it's likely not exclusive to this Rimworld. And since we know the psychic waves additionally can cause plants and animal life around them to die, there's a good chance that the animatries and grass are just organisms that thrive in that type of environment, intentionally created by ARCHOTECHs to interact with humans via psilinks wherever they go. Thus, I'm going to say that this also isn't exclusive to Providence, as well as the general yellow-green color scheme that Providence's machinery has, as most ARCHOTechnology appears to have that same color scheme. Now we can move on to Providence and speculate on its personality and motives, as well as what it might have done to put itself in this situation. So we can start by taking a look at the various starts of Rimworld and whether one of them is true, all of them are true but on different planets, or if all of them are canon and occurring on the same planet at the same time. We don't know, however, we can read into the starts of these scenarios, more specifically the Lost Tribe start, with a description that reads, "Your tribe was destroyed by the great blood machines sent by the gods. 5 of you managed to escape, now it's time to build a new home." It's worth noting that this is the only start of the game that implies the people were already on the Rimworld too. So, if what the tribe's people are saying is true, that means the machine gods, which from a tribal could mean either the Mechanoids or the ARCHOTECHs, or both, attacked their tribe, though it could be an attack on the whole planet, as there is a mech hive in the area, and succeeded in their attack destroying the tribe. The possibility that ARCHOTECH Providence could be behind this attack is low, due to it once again being dormant, but it's not zero yet either. Because when you make it to the Arconexus core, Providence does have a fair amount of Mechanoids just chilling around it that immediately turn hostile when you approach. However, these Mechanoids also hold the allegiance of whatever mech hive that generated on that planet. The ARCHOTECH doesn't have a representative faction yet, so it's worth noting that if these were meant to be on Providence's side, that their faction likely wouldn't really matter, and that they would likely go rogue anyways, as Mechanoids do, as once again Providence is dormant. So, there's fair evidence to suggest both for and against Providence being the aggressor, as well as the Mechanoids being theirs, but let's keep going. The Arconexus questline in Rimworld sees you getting pieces of a map to various ARCHOTECH parts, being a major ARCHOTECH structure, the grand ARCHOTECH structure, and finally the Arconexus core, which you can then touch it in the game. The question is, why do these tribes have these pieces of the map? Well, fortunately it tells us exactly why, because this was a ground zero planet of a transcendent world, where an ARCHOTECH ascended from a thinking machine, presumably a rogue persona AI, who was fighting a war with people beforehand, and the Transcendence, for one reason or another, left the ARCHOTECH dormant. This information is obviously significantly troubling, as this means Providence ascended from an artificial intelligence that was already fighting with humans before it even became an ARCHOTECH. And if my theory is correct that ARCHOTECHs retain aspects of their persona personalities, that the ARCHOTECH you awaken could completely be a being of spite and anger against humans. And that's why letting the Transcendence ending conclude is the only thing that permanently ends a Rimworld playthrough. But that felt too simple to me. Like, almost stupid to do. If the tribals knew about this godlike machine intelligence and its violence towards humanity, why would they even toy with the notion of awakening it? It's not any of these tribals are obsessed with the technology or death cults. Even the Horax cult isn't that reckless with their worship, I think. Thus, it felt like I was missing something about this ARCHOTECH, like maybe I misread how their personality would be, but no, I don't think that's the case because I had another idea. What if Providence intentionally didn't terminate the people of this Rimworld when it ascended, as we do know that typically during Transcendence, all of the planet is incorporated into the ARCHOTECH, or destroyed, or both, and this planet very clearly isn't fully incorporated into the ARCHOTECH. Thus, there had to be some other element of this story that I was missing here. And with everything I had learned with so far, not just about Providence, but all ARCHOTECHs, I was going to try and connect it all in the final part. So far, out of all the questions I had asked and set out to answer in this theory, we've come up with pretty convincing answers to most of them. Like, how did the first ARCHOTECH come to be? It happens due to a technological singularity, where a persona AI was given limitless resources and the creative freedom to then exponentially slingshot technological process, completely altering the course of humanity on whatever planet it was on, and that's what Transcendence is. The effect of it can be fairly random in its action, but pretty much always results in the creation of an ARCHOTECH that can manifest in many ways, including massive machine blocks in space, underground honeycombs of computers, and even hidden inside a human planet's internet. Now, as for what happened to Earth, was that an ARCHOTECH very likely transcended on Earth, and was also likely the first ARCHOTECH, who we have small implications of evidence to suggest that this first ARCHOTECH was Horax. How does an ARCHOTECH go about achieving its goals and why? We were able to speculate that an ARCHOTECH's personality and motives would be at least somewhat based off of whatever personality they had as a persona AI, and it would explain why they have dramatically mixed pieces of technology, both for causing help and harm to humanity. And lastly, we know that ARCHOTECHs themselves, with their infinity of wisdom and intelligence, produce psychic fields, especially around themselves, so powerful that they can completely distort the perception of anybody that approaches them, which explains why all attempts to approach or communicate with a fully activated ARCHOTECH largely end in failure. So, where do we go from here? For better or worse, I largely failed to figure out when the first ARCHOTECH came to be, and can only confirm that it came before the year 3500, and speculate that it likely also came before the year 3000. We can't confirm the ARCHOTECH on our Rimworld that I named Providence's motives either. Therefore, the best guess that I could give for when the first ARCHOTECH came to be would have to be around the years of 2500 to 3000, as these years would give plenty of leadway for ARCHOTECHs to create the first Mechanoids and begin producing them on a larger scale. Though you could even argue that the first Mechanoids would likely additionally coincide with the creation of the first ARCHOTECH also being in 3000, as an ARCHOTECH could likely invent them rather quickly. There's no way I can confirm this, as I've pretty much went through everything now. But this was ultimately the best guess I could come to with the years we have on Node. Thus, the only other loose end we had was the ARCHOTECH on this Rimworld we find ourselves on, the one I called Providence. So, I ran through everything we know about ARCHOTECHs and this Rimworld in specific one more time to see if I could come up with an answer for why we may awaken this ARCHOTECH. We know that this Rimworld is rather unique if it canonically has all these events occurring on it at the same time, and all paths are considered like the anomaly start, the Mechanoids start, Sanguiphage, Tribal, etc. And how it's especially unique as it has this still living yet dormant ARCHOTECH just sitting on the planet waiting to awaken again to finish transcending this world. So, here's my theory. I think the persona of Providence, as it became an ARCHOTECH, could have changed its mind during its conflict with the humans, as the new information that was able to pour into it gave it new insight that it may not have considered before, and it could have even been a human that allowed it to ascend to this level. However, since it was already in conflict with the humans, it couldn't simply stop the fighting, thus instead reset the humans on the planet, starting them over as tribals. However, in doing so, it also forced itself into a temporarily dormant state. A dormant state that drew the attention of a mech hive that may or may not have been on the side of the ARCHOTECH. And something we know about Mechanoids is that when independent, they are on the same level as a persona AI. Persona AI that when independent, though we don't know what all forms just individual persona AIs may take, we can actually interact with as well through a few quests. The most common quests being building monuments or allowing weather modifiers to be used on your home. This is already within what we know about persona AIs, that they would care about science and testing in regards to the weather and the climate, and that they would care about monuments and buildings, as if they have personalities they may very well also like art. And this is further influenced by the various types of persona AI buffs and debuffs that monoswords can have. However, what makes this significant is the fact that there are also independent persona cores out just casually speaking and making trades with people, though when it comes to mechanoids, they are invariably hostile towards human life when controlled by the mech hive. My assumption now is that the ARCHOTECH Providence's previous Persona AI could not have made the mechanoids itself, not just because the mechanoids are being controlled by a Cerebrix core, which is once again invariably hostile. Could Providence have fought using mechanoids? Yes, but the active mechanoids do not belong to it. We can look all across the destroyed land of this Rimworld, how there are ancient dangers with any random number of things inside, including mechanoids, destroyed cities, remains of robots, etc., and we came to the likely conclusion that this world was destroyed by mechanoids. But that wasn't the whole story, because it isn't over. Something intentionally stopped the mechanoids from winning this conflict, and I think it was Providence. Providence, mid-Transcendence, was able to not only degrade most human combatants on this Rimworld, but also destroy a fair portion of the mechanoid attackers, leaving its ultimate goals on this Rimworld when it does awaken, as an ARCHOTECH, uncertain. Perhaps Providence understood the danger of Horax with the monolith on its planet, and realized that it needed living humans in order to prevent the monolith from opening. Whether it had a change of heart for people when it became essentially equivalent to a god in intellect, or it could have just been a freak accident on Providence's part, and it's now just waiting there in a state of indefinite stalemate, with beings all around the world completely incapable of causing it harm, with only its psychic waves that can grow animatries, which provide benefits to humans who interact with them. And speaking of psychic waves, that leads me to one last theory. I've already stated earlier that I believe that ARCHOTECHs can't communicate with humans because their psychic waves are simply too powerful, and what if that's what those psychic events are? Psychic drones and waves that ARCHOTECHs seemingly intentionally send out to human populations for one reason or another. These psychic waves could literally be an ARCHOTECH attempting to communicate with you, positively or negatively, but since they are so far beyond us that it only comes out as just positive or negative emotions that we can't even begin to interpret. That could even be why psychic links are being given to humans by ARCHOTECHs, to one day become so linked to an ARCHOTECH that they could eventually communicate with you, and that's why Providence's animatries follow your colony wherever they go on the planet, so that you can help awaken it, and that is the ARCHOTECH theory. And that's the ARCHOTECH theory, the story of the most important beings in all of the Rimworld universe, machines with almost infinite power, a series of gods created by humanity, whether by mistake or intentionally, with varying personalities and motives. Their transcendence into an ARCHOTECH being the result of one of the hypothetical futuristic events that seems more and more likely every day in the real world, the technological singularity, where a machine can invent technology faster than a human, and something that thinks billion times faster changes the direction of human history. Every ARCHOTECH's predecessor, the Persona AIs that were upgraded or upgraded themselves into, with a wide variety of applications for them being medical, technical, maintenance, and even war, that caused these artificial intelligences to develop their own personality that would follow them into godhood. And of course there's psychic influences that exist no doubt due to their exponential intelligence and power capable of distorting reality around people who are even able to perceive it, and because they are so powerful, it's likely next to impossible to even communicate with one, as we think at such different levels that it can only offer waves of positive or negative emotions. And that ARCHOTECHs may even be adjusting humans to one day be able to communicate with one, thanks to the Psilings. The ARCHOTECHs have touched pretty much every aspect of the Rimworld universe, from the unbridled scourge of the Mechanoids and how they plague any system they happen to have a hive in, with indiscriminate assault towards all living humanoids, to creating the mysterious sanguiphages, seemingly one of the most important human xenotypes in the galaxy, with genetics that humans still to this day can't properly recreate, with their creation being completely unknown and potentially even for an ARCHOTECH's simple enjoyment. The once vast and all-encompassing empire becoming shattered due to an unknown calamity, and had been worshipping ARCHOTECHs as gods for hundreds of years, treating their psychic links as relics only fit for that of members of the nobility. And the hidden terrors of the void, the space that is just a shifted dimension away from the galaxy we find ourselves in, hiding horrors, monsters, and unfathomable darkness just beyond our line of sight. And of course Horax, the mad ARCHOTECH who had become sealed inside the void, who, although we can't confirm, may have been the first ARCHOTECH, and in turn could have been responsible for the destruction of Earth. There's many aspects and questions about Rimworld that we will never get clear answers on, and I think that's intentional, as Rimworld is advertised as a storytelling simulator to make of it what you will. However, when it comes to ARCHOTECHs, for now, we can make of them what we will, but I don't think this is the last time we will hear from them either.